So the way I want to start off today is simply, what is your sense of how much of dementia and Alzheimer's is actually preventable versus how much is just determined by what your genes are?
Yeah, that's a great question. The Historically, we've kind of thought that dementia is this thing that we essentially have no control over, and especially if people in our family have had it, it's like baked into our genes, and it's almost this inevitable thing that we don't have the ability to change. And thankfully, that really doesn't seem to be the case. Genetics. So I guess I'll zoom out quickly and say there are two. If we're talking about dementia, dementia has multiple different types. The most common is Alzheimer's dementia or Alzheimer's disease, and that's probably the one we're talking about most today. Although some of the other dementias, like vascular dementia, which is when you essentially get lots of mini strokes in your brain that over time create this picture of dementia, the risk factors for these other dimensions also overlap with Alzheimer's disease and dementia. So we can kind of think of them together in some way. But when we think about Alzheimer's disease, there's one type that is driven by genetics. Early onset Alzheimer's disease, it's, maybe just 1 or 2% of all the Alzheimer's disease that we see. It's single mutations that do occur in families, or can happen spontaneously. And so that is driven by genetics, and that in reality is a separate disease. Late onset Alzheimer's disease, which is the vast majority of Alzheimer's and what people are probably experiencing in themselves and loved ones, or that they're worried about, that maybe about 10% of your total risk is determined by genetics. And so then the way to flip that is to say more than 90% of your risk is determined by factors that we can change. So depending on who you ask, there have been these big formal commissions and bodies who have sat down and reviewed the literature. And essentially, it seems that at the low end, some say 40% is preventable. At the high end, some people are saying 70% or more. So in reality, probably the majority of Alzheimer's is preventable. And actually, even in those estimates, there are some risk factors that they haven't always taken into account. So I think if we addressed everything, we would be on the high end. 70-80% of dementia or more could be preventable with various changes to environment, lifestyle, and some societal stuff as well that we can talk about if you want.
Yeah, for sure. And we're going to dive into a lot of those things and probably deeply into some of them more than others. But real quickly, before we move to some of that stuff,